Your child's club controls maybe 3 hours of their week. The other 165 hours are yours. Most parents have never been told what to do with them, not because nobody cared, because nobody built a framework. This video is that framework. If you're here from parts 1 and 2, this is the part you take home. If this is the first video in this 3-part series, everything you need is here, and the playlist has the rest. And if some of what you're about to hear lands somewhere uncomfortable, that's not uncommon and might just be the right reaction. Every instruction that reaches your child during a match costs them. Not metaphorically, but concretely. When your child is on the ball, in that split second between receiving and deciding, they are reading an enormous amount from the environment around them. Where are the opponents? Where is space developing? What did they see 3 seconds ago when they looked? Where is their teammate making the run? What's the score? What does the shape of play look like? That reading is the game. That's the C gear running. That is the moment everything we've covered in parts 1 and 2 was building toward. And then a voice from the sideline, pass it now, switch it, push forward, get back, look behind you. Instead of responding to what the environment is showing them, your child now has to respond to a voice. The match environment is still offering the same picture. The defender's weight is still shifting. The run is still developing. The space is still opening up to the left. But their attention has been pulled away from all of that. They're no longer reading what the game is offering. They're trying to interpret an instruction instead. Research on how athletes direct their attention consistently shows that when attention is pulled away from the environment toward a command, movement becomes slower, less fluid, and less responsive. Not because the player has stopped trying, but because what they're attending to is no longer what the game is asking of them. The instruction doesn't help. It pulls them away from the environment they should be reading. I call this the joystick problem. A joystick parent, or a coach for that matter, is trying to remote control the player on the pitch. With the best intentions. They see things from the sideline that the child might not see, and they want to help, so they input, press, drop, spread out. The players, your child, becomes dependent on the joystick. When the input stops, when they move to a more competitive level, play for a coach who doesn't manage from the sideline, or simply lose the signal for a moment, they don't know how to read the game independently. The C gear has atrophied because the reading was always arriving from the outside. The paradox of this is that the more the joystick parent instructs, the less the child reads the game, not because the child is less intelligent somehow, but because the joysticking replaces the need to read the game. The habit of reading the game for themselves never develops, and if the answer always arrives from the sideline, your child can stop looking for it. That's the short game. Over the next section, I'll show you what 10 years of that looks like, because the compounding effect is where the real argument lives. The joystick frame is also a useful way to audit and check your own sideline behaviour. This Saturday, or whichever day the next match is on, count the number of direct instructions you give in a single match. Not encouragement, not well done's, but direct instructions. Where to stand, who to pass to, when to press, when to hold, where to look. Count them. If that number is above 0, You are a joystick parent to some degree. Most parents are. I know I've been as well. It's not a character flaw, it's a response to really, genuinely wanting your child to succeed. When I point this out to parents, when I describe the counting exercise and what it might reveal, there's usually a silence. They're replaying matches in their head and they're feeling something that's hard to name straight away. Relief, because there's finally an explanation for something they've been noticing, and something else alongside it, because they may have just recognized that the voice they thought was helping their child was actually pulling them away and out of the game. If you've got that feeling right now, that's a very normal reaction. It's not a reason to feel bad. It's the information you need. And it might change what you do on Saturday. If you've watched parts 1 and 2 of this short series, you know this already, but it's worth saying again because it's the reason this whole series exists. I tore my own ACL twice. I've had 5 surgeries on the same knee. I have some permanent restrictions I'll carry for the rest of my life. And I spent a decade in the physio clinic watching young players come through the door, injured, burned out, hitting ceilings they couldn't understand, and seeing a pattern. Players who trained hard, who had real ability, and came off the pitch confused about why it wasn't transferring to the match. Players who never got the environment they needed because nobody gave their parents the framework to build it. I built this because nobody gave it to my parents. I can't go back and change my own outcomes. In fact, I'm not sure I'd like to because they've made me who I am today. But you're here now before those outcomes are determined for your child. That's what this whole series is about. The 165 hours a week outside of team practice exist whether or not you design them. Your child is spending them in some environment, one you've built deliberately or one that assembled itself by default. The environments that assemble by default tend to produce a specific pattern. Children who perform in training and freeze in matches, who develop technical competence but never learn to read the game, who hit the investment phase at 15 and plateau because their game experience was too narrow. Kids whose physical bucket fills faster than the system can manage, who find somewhere between 15 and 17 that the love of the game they started with has quietly disappeared. I've seen those children in my clinic. I've asked their parents when things started to go wrong, and they almost always knew. They'd seen the signs. They just didn't have a framework to act on what they were seeing. That's the cost of the 165 hours going undesigned. That's what this framework is built to prevent. The sideline, the backyard, the car ride home. Most parents treat these as three separate problems. They're not, they're three separate expressions of the same thing. And one framework can cover them all. I call it S.H.A.D.E because silence is the first and most important element, and everything that follows builds on it. S is for silence. Of everything in this framework, silence will cost you the most on the first Saturday you try it. Not because it's complicated, but because the impulse to help is powerful, and staying quiet will feel, in the moment, like withholding or even sabotaging your kid. The argument for silence is everything we discussed in the joystick section. When your child is reading the match environment in real time, an instruction from the sideline pulls their attention off of it. The quality of their reading drops, and the instruction costs them more than it gives them. There is also a second argument for silence that goes beyond that. Silence communicates trust. When you say nothing during a difficult moment in a match, when your child tries something ambitious, loses the ball, and you don't say anything, you can also be communicating, I trust your process, I trust you to figure this out. When you say, no, not that way, you should have passed it, even if the tactical read was a good one, you communicate, your decisions are subject to my approval. And your child might begin to self-censor on the pitch, making safe decisions rather than ambitious ones. Because ambitious decisions invite evaluation from you. The safest decision is never the pass that opens the game. The safest decision is the sideways ball to a stationary teammate. Safe decisions produce nothing. But as the saying goes, nobody was fired for choosing IBM, even if that was the worst option, by far. Silence gives your child permission to be wrong. Permission to be wrong is permission to take risks. Permission to take risks is how a player who can actually play is built. Try practicing this at the next match. Commit to saying nothing directive during these 60 to 90 minutes of play. Encouragement is fine. Good run, well spotted. Come on. Celebration is great. But directive instructions, none. See how hard it is. Notice the moments when you almost speak. Notice what you were going to say. That's the invisible joystick hand moving. H is for hindsight free. The car at home might be where a lot of development is lost in youth sport. And it's where we as parents have a lot of direct control. After the match, you get in the car. Your child is in the back seat or in the passenger seat if they're older. They're in a post-match state, emotionally activated, tired, more vulnerable. Their sense of self right now is partially anchored to what happened in those last 60 to 90 minutes. Many parents replay the match from the beginning or from the critical moments. With the benefit of hindsight, they identify what the child did wrong, when the child should have done something differently, where the child let the team down. You should have tracked your runner in the second half. You gave the ball away 3 times in a row, or a question which is far better than a statement, like, why didn't you shoot when you were in that position? It feels like it's opening doors. It feels like coaching. It feels constructive. It is, in fact, one of the more damaging things you can do. Why? Because the child who made those decisions in real time, under real match conditions, with incomplete information, under physical stress, under emotional pressure, the decisions look different from the ground than they look from the sideline with the outcome already known. When you analyze those decisions with hindsight, with the knowledge of what happened next, you're not teaching the child to make better decisions. You're teaching the child that the drive home is an audit, that their decisions are subject to a post-match prosecution, as it were. The response is rather predictable. Your child's behaviour on the pitch changes. They start playing not to be wrong in the car rather than playing to solve the problem on the pitch. The safe decisions, the conservative choices. Your child who used to try to beat their opponent one-on-one now passes immediately because A failed dribble means 20 minutes of car ride analysis. Hindsight free means the car ride home never contains match analysis. What does it contain instead? First, the question, what was the most interesting problem you faced out there today, is a great place to start. Not what went wrong, not what were you thinking, simply the most interesting problem. You're signaling, I see the match as a puzzle, not a performance review. And I'm curious about your experience, not judging it. Your child has to think they were in the problem. You're inviting them to reflect on it from the inside. That's where learning lives, not as we'd like to think in our post match analysis, but in your child's own reflection on their own experience. Second, the follow up, if they engage with the first question, that is, what do you think you might try next time you see the same problem? Not what should you have done? What will you try next time? It's future facing, up to them to answer. There is no correct answer implied. And that's it. 2 questions. The rest is silence or general conversation about something else entirely. You'll figure that one out on your own. These questions comes from research on how learning works in sport. It activates your child's own reflections. It puts them in the driver's seat of their own development. And it makes the car ride home something they don't dread. Leave the match analysis for later. Waiting a full 24 to 48 hours is usually a far better time to get into it, if at all. A is for autonomy. This is a question I ask parents who are doing everything right and still wonder why the motivation feels fragile. Whose project is this? Yours or your child's? Decades of research on motivation shows that kids who does something because they want to, because the game is interesting to them, because they feel competent and growing, is building a habit that will last a long time, maybe even a lifetime. Kids who does it because their parents scheduled it, organized it, evaluated it, and will ask about it in the car, is doing it for the parent. When the parent's attention eventually shifts, or when the stakes get high enough that the parent's attention becomes a burden, the motivation goes with it. Autonomy in practice means several things. In the backyard or the driveway, it means your child has agency over what games are played. You can set up the environment, put the goals out, establish the general context, but the specific rules, the scoring, the variations, that could well belong to them. The child who invents their own games is building exactly what the best long-term athletes develop. Flexible responses to self-chosen problems. It also means letting them choose their own targets. Not, you need to be able to do this by Saturday. Not, I want you to practice your weak foot 20 minutes today. The parent who notices their child spending 20 minutes working on something specific because they chose to, because they found it interesting, should be deeply encouraged. That is intrinsic motivation in practice. And that's what the research says produces the best long term outcomes. In terms of club decisions, autonomy means that your child has a voice. At what level do they want to compete? Is the current club environment enjoyable for them? Not just for you. Do they want to continue in this position or try somewhere else? These are not questions with predetermined correct answers. They're questions where your child's answers matter. This does not mean children get unlimited veto power or sensible parental guidance. It means their preference is a primary input, not a secondary one, at best. One practical marker, does your child talk about football at dinner because they want to, Or does dinner become a debrief because you steer it there? The child who comes home from training with something they want to share about what they figured out, what went wrong, without being asked, is demonstrating autonomy. Protect that. It's the most important sign the motivation is intact. D is for design. Design is your role, not instruction, not correction, not evaluation. Design. Everything we've discussed in parts 1 and 2 in this series, the Gardner model, the representative environments, the 3-pipe bucket, comes down to this. Your job is to design the conditions, not to control the outcomes. And design has 3 components in practice. If you ended part 2 holding the word affordances, the action possibilities an environment offers, this is where you use it. Every design decision you make is a decision about what actions the environment invites. Make the environment invite things the match demands. First, the environment, the physical space. A small space affords quick, time-limited decisions. A larger space affords longer runs and different demands on the player. Goals in different positions change what actions make sense. The surface, hard, soft, uneven, changes what the player has to read and respond to. Your driveway, your backyard, your local park, each one offers different affordances. Use them all. Second, the task. The rules you set, the constraints you apply, the scoring system you use. Adding a rule, you get 2 goals if you score on your first touch, or every goal from a switch of play is worth 3 goals. Fundamentally changes what problems the game presents. These are chaos ingredients, small modifications to the rules that shift what the player has to read and respond to without changing the game's essential character. In a moment, I'll give you a fuller picture of this. Third, the challenge level. We might call it the Gartner's dial. Every game can be dialed up or down in difficulty. More space makes it easier for the attacker. Less space makes it harder in some ways. A numerical advantage, a 2v1 for instance, makes scoring easier. A skilled sibling makes it harder. Your job as the gardener and designer is to keep the dial in the right zone. Challenging but achievable. The research on skill development calls this desirable difficulty, the zone where the learning rate is the highest. Too easy and it becomes boring, leading to no development. Too hard and you're dealing with frustration and again, no development. In that zone, engagement, mistakes, reflection, adaptation, learning. Your child will tell you which zone they're in, sometimes with words, but always with their actions. Boredom looks like going through the motions. Frustration looks like anger, tears, or wanting to stop. Engagement looks like persistence, repeated attempts, talking out the problem without prompting. The Backyard Architect tool adjusts these chaos ingredients and the challenge dial for you based on the symptom you're targeting and your child's age and context. But you can also develop the feel for it yourself. Over time, you'll know when to turn the dial up and when to turn it down. E is for external focus. There's a category of instruction that almost every parent gives, almost every coach gives, and that consistently makes movement worse. It's not wrong in its intention. It's wrong in what it asks the player to attend to. Cues or words that pull attention toward the body, toward body position or body part movements, produce slower, more effortful, more mechanical movement. cues and words that keep attention on the environment, on the target, the space, the result. Produce faster, more fluid, more adaptable movement. Here are practical translations. Internal cue to avoid. Lock your ankle when you strike. External cue to use. Drive the ball through the target. Internal cue to avoid. Keep your chest over the ball. External cue to use. Make the ball stay on the ground past the cone. Internal cue to avoid. Use the inside of your foot. External cue to use. Put the ball into the shadow behind the defender. Internal cue to avoid. Head over the ball on your first touch. External cue to use. Take your first touch to where you want the ball to go next. The external cue keeps attention on the same kind of information the match presents. Spatial relationships, target positions, where the opponent is. The internal cue redirects attention to the body, which is not what the match asks of them. One more category of external focus cues that are particularly effective, and that's metaphors. Put the ball into the gap like you're threading a needle. Send it like you're posting a letter through a letterbox. These metaphors might work better because they keep attention on the environment, on the target, on the space, on the result, rather than the mechanics on how to achieve them. The movement that comes out is almost always closer to what you wanted than anything produced by a technical instruction, because you haven't interrupted the player's natural relationship with the game, so let the metaphors do the work instead. I said I was coming back to the chaos ingredients earlier. A chaos ingredient is any modification to a game that changes what your child has to read and respond to without removing the essential game structure. The thing to note about how these work is that they're not restrictions per se. They are incentives. You're not banning solutions. You're making certain solutions more rewarding. Think of it as behavioral economics applied to game design. You change the value landscape, your child navigates toward the high value actions. Kids who get a bonus goal for combining quickly through a wide area will start looking for that opportunity. Not because you told them to, but because the environment made that solution worth finding. And crucially, you haven't controlled the outcome. You've designed the conditions, and that's a gardener's hand at work. Here are 10 ingredients. Combine them, layer them, adjust them on the gardener's dial. Playing with a single goal solves a question before your child can ask it. Where am I attacking? Multiple small goals. 3 or 4 cones or water bottles scattered across the space. Keep that question open. In a 1v1, the attacker has more options and has to keep reading to find which one is available. The defender has to decide which to protect and live with the consequences of that choice. Neither player can stop looking or scanning. That constant environmental questioning is exactly what the match demands, and it develops almost automatically when the game is designed to require it. Quick combinations are among the hardest things to develop deliberately because standard small-sided games don't reward them. Your child can take 5 touches, find no solution, and play a safe pass without the environment ever nudging them towards something faster. You can add one incentive though. Any goal that comes from a first-time pass in the build-up is worth 2. They can still dribble, take 4 touches and score normally. They just don't get that bonus. Watch what changes. Your child starts arriving to receive the ball with a picture already forming. They start looking earlier, Not because you told them to, but because the environment makes it worth looking for. In a match, there are always positions of relative protection, angles that reduce pressure, pockets of space that are temporarily available. Designate one or two areas of the space you're practicing in as zones where your child in possession can't be pressured within 2 seconds. The bonus is no restrictions on where else the game goes, just a pocket of time available for those who can find it. What you might observe is that your child starts reading the space before they receive the ball, locating the relief before they need it. That preemptive reading, knowing where the safe position is before the ball arrives, is what separates the player who looks unhurried from the one who always seems to be receiving under pressure. Balanced teams are a coaching convenience, I should know. But matches are never balanced. In any given moment, one team usually has a numerical advantage somewhere on the pitch. And the team that finds and exploits it the fastest wins that moment. Try playing odd teams if possible, so 2v1s, 3v2s, 4v3s, even more unbalanced in sometimes. If you have the attacking team holding the extra player, the defending team has to solve a problem they can't solve perfectly. The attacking team has to find the free player before the situation closes. More real decisions per minute than most balanced formats. And the decisions closely resemble what happens in a match. Once attackers are comfortable creating against a numerical deficit, flip the script. Now the defending team holds the extra player. The attacking team has few resources and a harder problem to solve. This is a deliberate turn of the Gartner style upward. Use it when the previous game feels routine and your child needs disruption. A player who has spent time solving 1v2s or 2v3s in the backyard isn't as easily put off by pressure on game day. The difficulty is not something to manage around, it's the ingredient itself. A tap in from 2 yards out and a goal built from a switch of play are both worth 1 in a match, but they don't develop the same things. Add a bonus layer. A goal from a switch of play is worth 2. A goal from a one-touch combination in the build-up is worth 2. A goal scored after 15 consecutive passes without the opponent touching the ball might be worth 3. Your child can still score any way they want, but the environment now rewards specific qualities. What you'll observe is that your kid might start looking wide earlier because the wide goal is worth more. They start moving the ball before pressure arrives because patience in possession has a payoff. You haven't banned anything, you've just changed what the environment makes worth looking for again. Try having no communication allowed during play. Your child can't call for the ball, shout instructions, or give direction. The only information available is what they look for themselves. This sounds simple, but can be incredibly difficult. It forces your child to look. Constantly, it might feel like, because the verbal signal is gone. It demands scanning. Use this occasionally for a specific period, not as a permanent rule. If your child knows where the ball is coming back from, they'll position themselves for it. That's not reading the game, that's reading a predictable routine. When the restart position is random, a coin flip, a card drawn, whatever system you have to hand, nobody can pre-position themselves. In the practice game, all players have to stay adjusted, stay reading, looking, stay present to what the game is offering rather than what they expect it to offer. A small constraint with a measurable effect on how much your child is scanning in the seconds before the ball arrives. Transition, winning the ball and immediately turning it into attack, is perhaps the highest value phase of the modern game and one of the hardest to train deliberately. Try adding the incentive any goal scored within 5 seconds of winning possession counts double. Nobody has to rush. You can still build through the third and score normally. What might change is that your child starts reacting differently the moment they win the ball. The orientation forward becomes immediate. The scan before possession becomes more urgent because your child, who already has a picture, can move before their opponent has adjusted. The bonus makes the fast transition worth practicing, and the practice builds the skill. One player in the game is designated invisible to a specific opponent or opponents. That opponent can't challenge them directly. This creates a permanent, unequal condition that every player has to read and adapt to in real time. The defending team has to identify the ghost and restructure their shape around a problem they can't eliminate. The attacking team has to locate and use the ghost before the opportunity closes. Every player is solving a different problem at the same time. This is the highest demand option on the list. It makes spatial reading a requirement for everyone, not just the player on the ball. Use it when the game has become comfortable and you want to raise the ceiling. One more thing worth naming in here. In part 2, I introduced the concept of desirable difficulty. The research finding that effortful, error-prone variable practice transfers better to match conditions than smooth, predictable, clean practice. Every chaos ingredient is a mechanism for creating desirable difficulty. The messiness is the point. Let the practice look ugly. The match is where it needs to look good. You don't need all 10 of them. Pick one or two that match what you're seeing on game day. Use the backyard architect to find the right combination for your child's specific situation. It matches symptom to chaos ingredient automatically. Everything in this video is yours to use straight away. But some of you have been sitting with a specific question. What does this look like for my child? Not in general, but in my backyard, with my setup. The particular thing I'm watching on Saturday that I can't quite name. That question is what the Backyard Lab answers. There are 5 families per cohort. It lasts for 4 weeks. Within 48 hours of joining, I record a personal video audit of your child's practice environment. I tell you specifically what I see, give you 3 things to change this week. Then there are 4 live sessions with a group and a private channel where you can bring what you're seeing in real time. Founding member price is $495 and intake stops at May 18th. The link to join is below. The rest of this video will be here when you get back. The biggest mistake I've seen in youth football parenting, not the most emotionally damaging, not the most physically risky, but the most strategically costly, is short-termism. Making decisions for the next 3 months at the expense of the next 3, 5, 10 years. Making decisions for the next selection trial at the expense of the next decade of development. Let me show you how I think about the long game. Ages 6 to 12, the sampling window. This is not the time to specialize. This is the time to sample broadly multiple sports, multiple movement contexts, lots of free play. The priority at this stage is developing general athletic literacy, intrinsic motivation, and a love of movement. Formal instruction should be light. Competition should be low stakes. The question to ask about every opportunity during this phase: does this increase or reduce my child's enjoyment of physical activity? If the answer is reduce, even if the technical quality of the coaching is high, that is a bad trade during the sampling window. Ages 12 through 15, the specialization transition. This is a window for increasing football-specific commitment, if your child really wants to. Not because you, the parent, has decided to, not because the club is pushing, because your child, having sampled broadly, has identified football as the game they want to pursue. Peak height velocity sits in this window for most players. Load management is critical. The physical development material from part 2, the bucket, the 3 pipes, is most acutely relevant here. This is also the window where game reading begins to develop rapidly. The scanning skills, the ability to read space, the responses under pressure, with enough play in the right environments. The kid who enters this phase with broad athletic experience will develop their football reading more quickly. The early specialist who has been drilling since age 8 often starts to stall here because their game experience is narrower. They can execute familiar patterns, but struggle to adapt when the game presents something new. And the game will present something new. Ages 15 to 18, the investment phase. If your child wants to pursue football seriously, this is the phase for real specialization. Entering into an academy, increased structured training, competitive pressure, and technical refinement. What's rarely discussed is that the quality of the game reading built in the previous phase determines the ceiling at this phase to a large degree. The kid who arrives at 15 with a rich range of movement solutions developed across varied game environments will be coachable in the technical and tactical sense. They can take a specific tactical instruction and integrate it with what they already know. The player who arrives at 15, having been drilled since age 8, technically clean but narrow, often struggles here. They can execute, but they can't adapt. And the habit of waiting for instruction, of being managed on the pitch, that habit is now deeply embedded. Late specialization produces the best seniors. The research and the outcome data both say so. Trust the slow path. Ages 18 to 25, the senior game. This is where the long-term investment pays off. The child who was selected later played multiple sports, had more free, self-directed play, where Gardner developed. This is their window. The early selected child who peaked at 15 may plateau before they even get here. The late developer, still climbing. I watched this in a clinic and on the pitch. The kids who are best in their mid-20s are more often than not the ones who were the most impressive at 12. They're the ones who kept their love of the game intact through the development years, whose bodies were protected enough to stay healthy, and whose game reading was built on a foundation of genuine problem solving rather than fixed patterns. That pro player starts with the sampling window, and it starts with a gardener at home. The 70% dropout rate in youth sport doesn't live in the training environment alone. It lives in the identity structure that the training environment creates. Imagine your child's identity as a stool. The stool needs at least 4 legs to be stable. Leg 1 athlete, the footballer, the physical competitor, the person who plays. Leg 2, the student, the learner, the intellectual, the thinker. Leg 3, friend and social being, teammate, the companion, the connected person. Leg 4, artist, musician, or something else. The maker, the builder, the gamer, whatever else your child loves and does. A stool with 4 legs is stable. You can apply load in any direction. A stool with 1 leg, the footballer only, is inherently unstable. It sits on a single point, and any load from a different direction topples it. The developmental risk of single sport early specialization, beyond training and injury concerns, is when football is everything, when your child's entire identity, social network, sense of worth, relationship with you, the parent, and sense of future are all mediated through football performance. A single bad season, an injury, a single non-selection event might destabilize that stool. I've experienced this in the clinic. The 15-year-old who tears their hamstring and enters a psychological crisis that goes far beyond the injury itself. A 12-year-old who doesn't make the next selection and stops speaking at dinner for a week. The 14-year-old who begins to show symptoms of anxiety and burnout that, when you trace them back, begin the moment football became the only thing that mattered in the family. One-legged stools tend to tip over. Building the 4-legged stool is a parenting job, not a coaching job. Your child's club will be happy if football is everything. It simplifies their scheduling and increases your child's commitment to the program. It's part of your parental duties to maintain the other 3 legs actively, not as alternatives to football, not as distractions from football, but as valued, real commitments in their own right. Is there something else your child does that has nothing to do with football? Something they're good at or really interested in? Protect that. Schedule it. Talk about it at dinner as much as you talk about football. Does your child have friendships outside the football team? Peer relationships that exist in a different social context? Those matter. Kids whose only friends are teammates are dependent on the team for social connection. It's not bad in its own way, but when the team breaks up, as teams tend to do, the social foundation might go away with it. At some point, you'll see something in the training environment that concerns you. The sessions look like what we've been calling the mechanic approach. Your child is being pushed harder than their bucket can manage. The coach is doing something that contradicts what you now understand. What do you do with that? Let me start with an honest framing. The coach is almost certainly doing their best. Most youth football coaches are volunteers or low paid part timers who really care about the kids they work with. They are not the enemy. They are working within the same systemic constraints that produce the problems I've described earlier in this series. A coaching culture that rewards drilling, instruction, early specialization, and they may never have been exposed to research or the philosophy we've been discussing here. The goal is not to educate the coach. That will land badly almost every time. The goal is to advocate for your child within the coach's existing framework and to complement the club environment with the home environment you design. Here is a conversation that works. You're not questioning the coach's methods. You're telling them what you observe about your child specifically. I've noticed that Jake or Hannah seems to do better in training when he or she has time to figure things out, rather than when I give him or her a lot of instructions at home. I'm curious if you see something similar in practice sessions. That's a question about your child, not a criticism of the coach's approach. It invites the coach to share their observations. It plants a seed of the idea without triggering defensiveness. If the coach responds positively, yeah, actually, I've noticed the same thing, then you have an opening. I've been reading some stuff about how kids process game information, and it's made me think about how I interact with Jake or Hannah at home. Have you ever come across anything like that? Now you're sharing, not teaching. You're a fellow curious person, not an expert challenger. If the coach responds defensively, he or she just needs to work harder on the basics. Then you've learned something important. This coach is operating from a different philosophy and is unlikely to change based on a parent conversation. Your work is to complement, not converge. Design the home environment right. That's where your leverage lives. The second conversation worth having is about load, specifically about the growth spurt. If your child is in the peak height velocity phase, if you can see they're growing rapidly, if they're reporting heel pain, knee pain, hip discomfort, this is a conversation to have with the coach. I'm seeing some signs that my child might be in a growth phase. Their body is changing quickly, and I've noticed some tightness in their knees and heels after heavy training weeks. I want to make sure we're managing their load through this period. Can we talk about when they're showing signs of fatigue and how we can manage that? It's not a medical order, and most coaches, when presented with it this way, will respond appropriately. The ones who don't, the ones who push harder through obvious physical distress in a growing child, they are coaches you need to make harder decisions about. The third conversation is the one about playing time and selection. This is the most emotionally charged, and the advice is that you don't want to have it when you're angry, you don't want to have it on the day of a match, and don't frame it as it being about your child's deserving anything. Just, can we set up a brief meeting to talk about where you see my child in their development this season and what they should be working on? That's it. That's the question. What you're not doing is challenging the selection. You're asking the coach for feedback about your child. Most coaches will have that meeting. In the meeting, you'll learn whether that coach has a real developmental view of your child or whether your child is being managed as a squad asset. Both are useful information. The training environment doesn't develop your child on its own. It provides the stimulus. What happens outside of it? Sleep, recovery, the psychological load, those determine how much of that stimulus is converted into adaptation and improvement. Get the stimulus right, the recovery wrong, and most of the hard work gets lost. The recovery has three main variables, none of them really complicated. During the adolescent growth spurt, the body's primary period of repair and physical development happens during sleep. Not rest, not sitting on the couch. Sleep. Research shows that adolescent athletes need 9 to 11 hours of sleep per night during periods of intense training and rapid growth. Most might be getting 6 to 7. That is not a preference gap. It's a deficit that affects tissue repair, injury risk, mood regulation, and the development of physical skills. The adaptation your child's body is building in practice happens partly during sleep. Cut it short, and you cut the development short. The backyard work, the chaos ingredient session, the match itself, all of it builds on sleep as the foundation. If you protect sleep, the environment you've designed gets to do its full job. Cut it short, and it doesn't. The clearest practical intervention you can make for your child's football development, outside of designing their practice environment, is protecting their sleep. 9 to 11 hours, consistently, through the growth years. This is pipe 3 of the physical bucket, and it fills the bucket through the same physiological pathway as physical load. Academic pressure, social conflict, family stress, anxiety about selection, pressure from you, the parent, to perform. All of these activate the body's stress response. The inflammatory load increases, tissue recovery slows, and the already full bucket fills faster. A child under significant academic or social stress going into an intense training block is at elevated risk. Not because anything that happens on the pitch, but because their biological load is already high before the ball is even kicked. Helping manage psychological stress in youth athletes isn't about removing all difficulty or protecting yourself from challenge. Challenge is healthy. It's what builds resilience and problem-solving capacity. What you're managing is the total load. Making sure that periods with high academic stress coincide with slightly lower training intensity, that the home environment provides a recovery space rather than an additional performance context. When your child comes home from school after a difficult day, an exam gone wrong, a social conflict, just a hard week, the worst time to schedule a 90-minute intense backyard session might be that evening. Not because they can't handle it, but because the bucket is already near full, and what the bucket needs is recovery, not more input. What might be useful is to develop a habit of asking yourself, not out loud every time, but internally as you plan the week, can be, where is the bucket load right now? What's happened this week across all 3 pipes? What does my child need more? Challenge or recovery? And sometimes a challenge in a different area, like football, can be recovery as well. Just be mindful of the intensity of it. I'll keep this brief because it's not my primary domain, but the basics matter a lot. Growing adolescent athletes need more calories than most of us parents realize. The combination of rapid growth, training load, and an active metabolism means caloric deficit is a real risk. Not from restriction, but from simply not eating enough to meet the demand. This calorie deficit can lead to something called RED-S, stands for relative energy deficiency in sports, and is very closely linked to bone health and bone stress injuries, better known as stress fractures in young athletes. If your child is hungry all the time and they have a normal weight, let them eat, even if what they're eating is not optimal. Protein matters for tissue repair. Getting enough of it is achievable through normal eating, eggs, dairy, meat, legumes, but it might require some attention. Iron is particularly important for young athletes, especially for girls. Iron deficiency is the most common nutritional deficiency in adolescent female athletes and a frequent contributor to unexplained fatigue and performance drops. Mild dehydration, as little as 2% of body weight sometimes, measurably impacts the ability to read the game and to respond quickly. The child who is slightly dehydrated doesn't just perform worse physically, the perceptual demands of the match become harder to meet. Remind them to drink before they feel thirsty. Let's take a step back. Look at the full picture of what these 3 videos have been about. Because it's easy in a series like this to lose sight of the deepest purpose of it all. You're not developing a professional footballer. Maybe your child will become one if they want to. The talent and health is there. Nothing I've said prevents that, and most of what I've said increases the probability of it. But that's not the purpose of what we've been talking about. You're protecting a person who is, right now, in one of the most formative developmental periods of their life. A person who is building their relationship to competition, to failure, to effort, to their own body, to being part of a team, to authority, to perseverance. A person who is learning through every training session, every match, every car ride home, what it means to try hard at something and either succeed or not succeed. Research on sports participation and long-term well-being shows that what matters for lifelong benefit is not the level reached, it's not the trophies, it's whether your child exits youth sports with their love of physical activity intact, with a healthy relationship to their body, with a durable sense of competence that doesn't collapse when the team has a bad result. That's what you as the gardener protects. Every time you stay quiet on the sideline when you want to shout, you're protecting that. Every time the car ride home is a question and a conversation rather than a review, you're protecting that. Every time you design the backyard game instead of running the backyard drill, you're protecting that. Every time you protect your child's sleep, manage their bucket, build the other legs of the stool, you're protecting that. There are thousands of parents who have sensed all of this, but who never had a framework for it. The S.H.A.D.E curriculum, the 10 years of development decisions that fall entirely on the parent side of the equation. It exists whether or not anyone equips you for it. The club can't or won't provide this. That's why I built it, and I hope it helps. You showed up for this, which tells me something about the kind of parent you are and the kind of environment your child is developing in. In part 2, I promised you a 5-part approach to designing the 165 hours the club doesn't touch. Here it is. In an average week, your child probably has 2 or 3 club sessions and maybe 1 match. That's roughly 3 to 4 hours of structured football. The other 165 hours are yours. Each day, 10 minutes of free, self-directed physical activity. No scheduled training, no structured sessions, just movement. Whatever they choose. Shooting at a wall, juggling, a kick around with a sibling, unstructured, their choice. This is the intrinsic motivation tank being filled. 2 to 3 times per week, a chaos ingredient game. 20 to 30 minutes. You set up the environment. The backyard architect gives you the specific game. They play. You watch, participate, and adjust the gardener style. After a match, the 2 questions. That's it. What was the most interesting problem, and what will you try next time? No analysis, no replay, no improvement notes. Once a week, one check on the bucket. Not a formal meeting, just an internal question. Where are the 3 pipes this week? What's the school like? Is there anything unusual in the stress landscape? Is the training load going up while the other loads are also up? Then adjust accordingly. Each month, a conversation with your child about what they enjoy, what they find hard, what they want more or less of. Not a performance review, just a check-in on the joy and autonomy indicators. That framework, the daily free play, the 2 to 3 chaos ingredient sessions, the 2-question car ride, the weekly bucket check, the monthly check-in, that's the basis of the home curriculum, the shadow curriculum that nobody else is providing. The club can't provide it, but you can. This is what I know about developing young footballers and young people, built from 10 years in the clinic, years on the training pitch, and a career reading the science. I put it here because this is where you are. And here's what I want you to do next. Step 1, the Backyard Architect. It's a free tool you can use at home. It takes a minute to fill in your child's situation. It generates the first chaos ingredient game based on what you're seeing on a Saturday. Run it this week and see what happens. The link can be found below. Step 2, the first of the 2 questions. Tonight or after the next match, what was the most interesting problem? That's all you need. See how the conversation goes differently. Step 3, if you want to work with me directly, if you want me to actually look at your specific situation, audit your child's practice environment on camera, and join 4 weeks of live strategy sessions with 4 other families who are all working through exactly this. The Backyard Lab is open right now. 5 families per cohort, 4 weeks. I'll send you a personal video audit within 48 hours of you joining. Then 4 live group sessions, a private group, and direct feedback from me on what you're seeing and what to adjust. The founding member price is $495. That price is not going to stay there as the program builds a track record. The founding member price exists because the first cohort is the proof of concept. And I want the right families in it. Families who have watched the series and understand the philosophy. Families who are ready to implement this week, not think about it for 6 months. The link to join is below. The intake closes on May 18th. You now have all the information needed, so go build the environment. Thanks for watching. See you next time.